I was 10 years old when I watched my baby sister get traded for a jug of whiskey. Mama did not cry. Papa counted coins while she wailed in the arms of a stranger. I stood barefoot in the mud outside that saloon, too small to stop it, too old to forget. Her name was June. And I swore, right then and there, I would find her, even if it took me a lifetime. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. I was not born into anything but hunger. My name is Levi McGraw, and if you had come looking for me back then, you would have found a barefoot boy behind the whiskey house, sleeping beside a broken wagon and a sick dog with no name. I had 3 younger siblings, Sarah, Eli, and June. We were skin and bones and silence. Children born to parents who never wanted us. Mama used to be pretty, I think. There were stories from the older men in town about how she once danced in church and made the whole place feel holy. But by the time I was old enough to understand anything, she had hollow eyes and red knuckles, always searching for the bottom of a bottle. Papa was mean when sober and dangerous when drunk. Together, they were ruin. We lived behind the Stag Aaron Mule Saloon. Papa played cards there and Mama sang sometimes when she was not too far gone. No school. No friends. Just chores that made us quiet and days that made us older than we should have been. June was the baby. Blonde curls and soft eyes. I remember once she tried to give me a dandelion and I told her flowers could not grow in places like this. She cried, and I felt like the worst boy in the world. One day, Sarah disappeared. Mama said she ran off. But I knew Mama had taken her to that back alley where the men waited. I followed once, and I saw it. A man gave Mama a pouch of coins and took Sarah in his arms. My sister was only 7. That night, I sat outside in the cold and tried not to feel. If I felt, I would break. Weeks later, Eli was gone. Mama said he died of fever, but there was no grave. No one in town mentioned it. I found his toy horse under the wagon, and I kept it. It smelled like wood smoke and dirt. That was when I began to dream of running. But I could not leave June. She clung to me like the last bit of light in a long tunnel. Every night, I would wrap my arms around her small body and tell her stories about farms and rivers and places where people kept their promises. She would fall asleep with her cheek against my chest. I stopped sleeping altogether, listening for danger. The day they sold her started like any other. Mama had a black eye. Papa was pacing. He said we needed money for the journey to New Mexico. I had never heard of it. But Mama said something about too many mouths. Then she looked at June like she was not real. I fought. I screamed. I bit Papa's arm and he hit me so hard I blacked out. When I woke up, June was gone. The only thing left was her ribbon, blue as the sky we never looked up at. I held it in my fist until my knuckles bled. Papa sold me next. A rancher named Mr. Wendell paid $10 and a pair of boots for me. I remember Mama smiling for the first time in months. "You always were the strong one," she said. As if that was some kind of blessing. Mr. Wendell took me west. We rode 3 days in silence. I sat in the back of a wagon full of tools. My legs dangled, my spirit broken. I did not cry. Boys like me did not get to cry. I counted the stars at night and whispered June's name like a prayer. Over and over. Until I forgot what peace felt like and only remembered the sound of her laugh. The ranch was big and lonely. Mr. Wendell was not cruel, but he was hard. I shoveled manure, fixed fences, chased cattle, and slept in the hayloft. I earned my food, and that felt like more than I ever had before. But no one asked about me. No one cared where I came from. I was another mouth with hands. Years passed. I grew tall. Strong. My face changed. But inside, I stayed 10 years old. I never stopped looking for June. Every town we passed, every trading post, I asked. Showed the ribbon to kind women. Described her curls. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished into the dust. I never let anyone touch me. Never let anyone close. I was afraid they would leave, too. Or worse, sell me. By the time I was 27, I had been on 6 ranches, walked across 3 territories, and never once found what I was looking for. Then came the day I met Clara. But that story is not just about meeting someone. It is about remembering who I was, before I was sold for $10 and a lie. Because sometimes, the ones who lose everything, are the ones who find something deeper. Like love. Like home. Like the truth. I was 27 and tired. Not the kind of tired a night's sleep could fix, but the deep kind. The kind that settles into your bones when too many winters have passed and too few words have been spoken in kindness. Each day, I rose before the sun. Fed the horses, hauled water, mended fences. My hands were calloused, my back scarred from falling off colts and lifting too much alone. The land did not care about my past. It only demanded sweat and silence. Still, I kept June's ribbon in the pocket of my coat. Sometimes I would take it out at night, sit on the porch of whatever ranch I worked, and run my fingers over the frayed edges. I could not remember the softness of her skin anymore, or the shape of her smile, but I remembered her laugh. High and quick, like the sound a creek makes when it tumbles over rocks. I prayed for her each night. Not loud. Just in my heart. God, if she is out there, let her be warm. Let her be safe. And let her forgive me for not stopping it. I stayed mostly in the high country, drifting from ranch to ranch. Folks called me Quiet Levi, and that suited me fine. I did not drink. I did not fight. I worked hard, kept to myself, and left when the questions got too deep. Women sometimes tried to speak sweet to me. A baker's daughter in Utah. A red-haired teacher in Montana. But I could not give what I did not have. I had love, yes, but it was buried in grief and tied to a memory I could not release. What if June was still waiting for me? What if she had not been adopted or loved or saved? That thought haunted me worse than any ghost. It made me afraid to be happy, afraid to stay too long anywhere. What right did I have to peace if she still lived in pain? I had dreams, strange, broken dreams. In one, I saw her standing barefoot on a railroad track, arms outstretched, calling my name. I would run and run but never reach her. In another, she was at the edge of a forest, dressed in white, holding that same blue ribbon. I would wake with tears in my eyes, heart pounding like a drum. I once asked a preacher if God ever gives back what was stolen. He looked at me for a long time and said, not always in the way we expect, but always in the way we need. I did not understand that then. One winter, I worked a ranch outside of Bridger Pass. Harsh land. Wind like knives. The owner was a decent man, but his wife had passed and his boys were angry at the world. I stayed in the loft and worked with my head down. One night, I heard crying. A coyote had gotten into the chicken coop, and the youngest boy was trying to scare it off with a lantern and tears. I ran out, shotgun in hand, and fired once into the sky. The coyote fled, and the boy looked up at me like I was a giant. He said, I thought I was alone. I looked at him, kneeling in the snow, and said, you are not. But those words tasted foreign on my tongue. In truth, I felt alone all the time. Until one spring morning when the wind changed, and a wagon came barreling down the hill, out of control, with a woman screaming and a baby in the back. The horses were spooked. The driver had fallen. I dropped my shovel and ran. Not thinking. Just running. I caught the lead rope, pulled with all my strength, boots sliding in the mud. The wagon jerked, tilted, and stopped just short of the fence. The woman jumped down, breathless and wild-eyed. She clutched the baby tight and looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. "Are you hurt?" I asked, my voice low. She shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "You saved us." I nodded, tipped my hat, and started to walk away. But she said something I had not heard in years. "Wait. What is your name?" I turned slowly. That small, honest question wrapped around my heart like a lasso. "Levi," I said. She smiled through tears. "Well, Levi, would you care for some supper? It is the least I can do." I hesitated. But the baby looked at me with wide, curious eyes. Something in me softened. Maybe just one meal. Maybe just one night. But life has a way of shifting when we least expect it. Her name was Clara. I learned that over stew and biscuits inside a small cabin nestled at the edge of pine woods. The baby's name was Ruth, red hair like firelight and a sleepy laugh that made my chest ache. Clara moved slow. Careful, like someone who had been hit before and still listened for footsteps behind her. Her hands shook when she poured the coffee, though she tried to hide it by keeping them busy. The cabin smelled like herbs and lye soap. Homemade. Quiet. Honest. "Thank you," she said again, setting down the spoon. "You likely saved our lives today." I nodded. Most folks would have done the same. She gave me a look then. Not harsh. Just tired. Most folks would have kept walking. I had no answer for that, so I looked down at my plate. The stew was hot and good. Meat, potatoes, carrots, the kind of meal that made you feel human again. Ruth babbled in her cradle, tiny fists waving at the ceiling. I watched her with a strange longing. I could not remember ever holding June when she was that small. But I knew I had. "You are not from around here," Clara said gently. "No, ma'am." "You got people?" I shook my head. "Not anymore." She stared at me for a moment too long, then rose and stirred the fire. "Me neither," she whispered. Later, I learned her husband had died 2 winters before, but not from illness or accident. He had been cruel. A man who smiled in church but turned into a monster behind closed doors. One day, Clara took Ruth and ran. The law never came after her, but shame did. This was the farthest place she could afford, and the loneliest she could bear. I offered to fix her broken fence the next day. I did not know why. Maybe I wanted to repay the meal. Maybe I just wanted a reason to stay a little longer. She accepted with a small nod. The work was simple. The silence was not. She watched me from the porch, Ruth nestled against her chest. I tried not to stare, but something about them, mother and child, stirred something deep. A kind of ache that felt almost holy. "You work with your hands," she said after an hour. "Always have. Ever think of settling somewhere?" "No, ma'am." "Why not?" I hesitated. Wiped the sweat from my brow. Never felt like the settling type. She smiled, but it was sad. "Me neither. Until I had to." That night, she asked if I wanted to stay in the barn. I did. The next morning, she offered coffee. Then eggs. One day turned into 2. 2 into a week. I mended her roof. She mended my shirt. She showed me where the wild mint grew. I built a new coop for her hens. Sometimes we would sit on the porch in the fading light, not speaking much. Just listening to the wind rustle the grass and Ruth coo in her blanket. I started to feel something dangerous. Safe. One evening, she brought out a little book of poems. Said her mother gave it to her before she passed. She read aloud while Ruth slept, and I found myself closing my eyes, not from boredom, but because it felt like a prayer. "You ever read poetry?" she asked. I shook my head. "Too many hard words." She smiled. "This one is simple." She read about rivers and seasons and the ache of waiting. Her voice trembled a little, and I realized it was not just reading. It was remembering. I said, "That poem sounds like you." She looked up, startled. Then something passed between us. A breath. A quiet understanding. She touched my hand. Just once. But that was the beginning. Of what, I did not yet know. I only knew that I wanted to fix everything for her. But I could not even fix what had been broken inside me. Still, I kept showing up. Kept listening. Kept watching the way she smiled at Ruth, the way she saved her warmest words for the child who never had to earn them. It made me think of June. What would she be now? Grown? Married? Lost? One night, Clara said, "Sometimes I think the Lord sends us people we do not deserve." I asked, "You mean Ruth?" She looked at me. Her eyes were soft and stormy. "I meant you." I said nothing. Because the truth is, I felt like the one who did not deserve her. But something had shifted. The porch lights felt warmer. The stew tasted sweeter. And the silence between us no longer felt empty. It felt like a promise. Spring came late that year. The snow lingered along the edge of Clara's fields like it was afraid to let go. But inside the cabin, something had begun to thaw. Not just in the soil, but in us. Every morning, I split firewood before she woke. Sometimes she would peek through the window, her hair still tousled from sleep, and offer a smile. That smile became my morning prayer. I did not know how to name what was growing between us, but I felt it in the way she made an extra biscuit without asking, or how I filled her water barrel before she noticed it was low. Still, we never spoke of it. Maybe because we were both afraid it would disappear if we did. One afternoon, Clara was tending to the baby while I hammered in a new gate post. A sudden gust blew her shawl down the hill, and without thinking, I chased after it. Caught it just before it hit the creek. When I turned to bring it back, I saw her laughing. Truly laughing. The kind that makes your chest feel like it is filled with sunlight. "You move fast for a man who walks like he carries 1,000 pounds, she teased. I froze. Because that was the truth I never told. I did carry something heavy. Guilt. Shame. Memories that clung to me like old bruises. "I do not always walk that way," I said softly. She nodded. "Maybe someday you will walk lighter." But how could I? I had been sold like a bag of potatoes. Watched my baby sister vanish. Failed to save anyone. I was not a man who deserved lightness. Still, I wanted it. More than anything. That evening, I carved a toy horse out of spare wood and gave it to Ruth. She grabbed it with chubby fingers, gummed it, then giggled. Clara stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "Did you have one like that growing up?" I hesitated. Then said, "It belonged to my brother. He died young. I kept his horse." She reached across the table and touched my wrist. "You carry their stories like they are still living." I nodded. She understood more than she said. Days passed, and I began to look forward to things. The way Clara hummed when she needed dough. How Ruth squealed when she saw me. The softness in the air after chores were done. Then came the first real storm. A windstorm that howled through the hills like it was looking for something lost. It tore shingles from the roof, knocked over the henhouse, and rattled every window in the cabin. We worked side by side, tying down what we could, bracing the doors, covering Ruth with blankets. By nightfall, the lanterns flickered low, and the house shook like a frightened animal. Clara sat near the hearth, cradling Ruth. Her lips moved in silent prayer. I sat beside her. She looked at me and said, "I am glad you are here." Those 6 words cracked something wide open inside me. I almost told her everything then. About June. About the saloon. About the way I still dreamed of children crying in the dark. But I did not. Because something in her eyes said she was not ready for my sorrow. And something in my heart said I was not ready for her pity. Instead, I said, "You are strong." She smiled. Only because I had to be. We sat in silence while the wind screamed outside. And that was the night I realized I loved her. Not with heat or haste, but with the steady ache of someone who had lived too long without softness. But love, I learned, is not always enough to erase the past. A few days later, I returned from town with flour and nails, and found Clara crying on the porch. A man had come while I was gone. Said he was a bounty hunter. Said Clara's name was not really Clara. Said she had run from her husband, and taken money when she left. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Clara's face was pale. Her hands shook again. "I did not steal," she whispered. "I took what was mine. What I earned. I swear it, Levi." I believed her. And yet, doubt crept in like a thief. What if she had lied? What if I had built something out of hope that could never last? That night, I stayed in the barn. She did not ask me to. I just could not look at her. The silence between us, once warm, now felt sharp. I stared at the rafters and wondered if I had made a mistake letting my guard down. Maybe love was not meant for men like me. Maybe we were just passing through people's lives like storms. And just like that, I began to pull away. And she felt it. I saw it in her eyes the next morning when she brought coffee to the barn and found me already saddling my horse. "You are leaving?" she asked, her voice small. I did not lie. "Just for a ride. Need to clear my head." She stepped back, nodded. "Be safe," she said. But I was not. Because when you run from something kind, something real, you do not find peace. You find ghosts. The ride took me nowhere. I followed the ridge line past the cottonwoods, through fields turning gold with the promise of spring. The sun was warm, but I felt cold. No matter how far I rode, Clara's voice stayed in my head. I did not steal. What hurt most was that I believed her. Deep down, I knew Clara did not lie. But I had spent so long expecting people to leave or turn cruel, I could not tell the difference between danger and love anymore. That night, I camped under the stars. I laid out my bedroll, stared at the sky, and pulled June's ribbon from my coat pocket. It was nearly worn through. I held it between my fingers like a lifeline. And I remembered her. The way she used to curl up beside me, thumb in her mouth, trusting me to keep her safe. I had failed her. Just like I was failing Clara. The guilt hit hard, like it always did, but this time, something shifted. I looked at the ribbon, then up at the stars, and said out loud, "I am tired of running." The wind answered back like a whisper. The next morning, I rode back before sunrise. Clara was on the porch with Ruth in her lap. Her face was pale and drawn, like she had not slept. When I dismounted, she did not rise. "You came back," she said, barely above a whisper. I walked up slow. "I never meant to hurt you," I said. "I just got scared. Not of you, of losing something good again." Clara's eyes filled, but she stayed silent. I sat down beside her, took off my hat, and set it on my knee. "There is something I have never told anyone," I said. She turned slightly, holding Ruth close. "I had 3 siblings," I began. "We lived behind a saloon. Mama and Papa were drunk more than they were sober. One by one, they sold us. My baby sister, June, was the last. I fought, but I was too small. She cried when they gave her away, and I could not stop it. Clara closed her eyes. I never saw her again, I said. But I carry this. I pulled out the ribbon, frayed and faded. Clara touched it gently, then looked up at me. You never had a choice, she said. No, I said. But I still carry the shame. She laid her hand over mine. I know what it feels like to live in fear. I know what it feels like to lie awake wondering if the past will find you. We sat there a long time, Ruth babbling quietly between us. Finally, Clara said, my real name is Clara May Dalton. I married a man named Thomas when I was 16. He was kind at first. Then he started drinking. Then came the bruises. The yelling. The broken things. I felt my hands curl into fists. One day, he hit Ruth, she whispered. Just a tap, but enough. I packed what I could, took the money I had hidden, and ran. That bounty hunter, he is from Thomas's family. They want the land and what little I took. Do you want to fight it? I asked. She nodded. I want to live. I want Ruth to grow up safe. I looked at her then, not just as a woman I admired, but as someone I needed. Then we fight, I said. She reached for my hand. I am scared, she admitted. I squeezed it gently. So am I. That night, I stayed in the cabin. Not because she asked me to, but because I no longer wanted to run. We tucked Ruth in together. Her small hand curled around my finger as she fell asleep. Later, by the fire, Clara handed me her mother's book of poems. I want you to read one, she said. I hesitated, then took it. The words were simple. About roots and rivers and finding home. I stumbled through, my voice low and slow. When I finished, she leaned her head against my shoulder. You are not who they said you were, she whispered. Neither are you, I replied. And there, in that small cabin tucked into the edge of nowhere, something sacred bloomed. Not fireworks. Not passion. But trust. Real, raw trust. The kind that grows slow and deep. The kind that can carry a man like me out of darkness. Clara's cabin had become my whole world. It was not big or fancy, but it smelled like bread and soap and baby powder. And it held the first kind of peace I had ever known. I had started sleeping through the night again. I had even smiled, a real one, the kind that came from the chest and not the face. But peace, I have learned, is fragile. It only takes one knock at the door to tear it wide open. It happened 3 days after that firelit night. I was chopping kindling out back when Ruth let out a shrill cry. Then Clara's voice, shaking, sharp. I dropped the axe and ran. There, standing on the porch, was a man with a silver badge and a face like stone. Beside him stood a tall stranger with a scar across his cheek. The kind of man who did not blink much. The lawman held a folded paper. You Levi McGraw? He asked. I nodded. He looked at Clara. And you're Clara May Dalton, widow of Thomas Dalton? Clara's arms tightened around Ruth. Her voice wavered. I was. The scarred man stepped forward. That there's my cousin's wife. She ran off with his baby and half his land money. We're here to bring her back. I stepped between them before I could think. She is not going anywhere. The lawman sighed, unfolding the paper. Got a warrant here. Signed by a judge in El Paso. Says she's wanted for theft and desertion. Clara's face went pale. But he is dead, she whispered. Dead men don't write complaints, the scarred man growled. But his brother did. Family wants justice. I saw Clara's eyes fill, but no tears fell. She stood straighter, like the memory of all she survived was bracing her bones. "I didn't steal," she said, her voice clear. "That money was mine. He beat me. He beat the baby." The scarred man snorted. "No proof of that now, is there?" I wanted to hit him. Instead, I turned to the lawman. "Let her speak," I said. But the lawman just stared. "You got 3 days. She can come willingly, or we'll take her." Then he tipped his hat, and they rode off. As soon as they were gone, Clara collapsed into the porch rail, shaking. I held her tight. But inside me, something cracked. Because the law was the law. And I had seen enough to know it did not always favor the innocent. That night, I could not sleep. I sat outside with the ribbon in one hand and the poem book in the other. The stars blinked, but I felt no comfort. How could something so good, so gentle, be ripped away again? And why, after all these years, did it still feel like I was 10 years old, standing outside the saloon, watching someone I loved get taken? The next morning, Clara found me in the barn. "I want to run," she said. I stood, straw falling from my lap. "I will go with you." She shook her head. "No. If you come, they will call it aiding. You will hang, Levi. I have nothing to lose." She stepped forward, voice trembling. "Yes, you do. You have your name. Your future. Your life." I grabbed her shoulders. "You and Ruth are my life." Her eyes brimmed. "Then please, do not lose yourself saving me." And that was when I broke. "I already lost myself," I said, my voice rough. "Years ago. When I let my baby sister get sold. When I walked away instead of fighting. You are the first good thing I have ever had." Clara reached for me, but I stepped back. Because the truth was, I did not know how to be loved without fear. I turned, walked out into the field, and did not stop until my boots were wet with creek water. There, I shouted into the wind. "I am not him." I did not know if I meant my father, or the man I had become. When I returned, Clara was gone. She had left a note on the table, written in careful script. "I love you, Levi. Enough to not let you destroy yourself for me. I will find a way. But this is my burden to carry. Tell Ruth I did not leave because I wanted to. Tell her I left because I had to." I sat at that table for hours, staring at the empty cradle. The scent of her hair still lingered in the blanket. Ruth slept in my arms, unaware that the world had tilted again. I had lost her. And this time, I could not blame anyone else. The cabin felt like a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards was louder in Clara's absence. Every room held her voice, her touch, the ghost of her laughter. I kept Ruth close, tighter than I should have. She fussed, confused and restless, as if she knew something sacred had gone missing. I tried to hold it together. I fed the baby. Changed her. Rocked her through the night. But I could not stop the ache. It spread through me like wildfire, burning through muscle and memory. I had not known how much she meant until the silence told me. Clara was gone. And I had let her go. Not with my words, but with my silence. With my fear. That was always my curse. I ran from the things that mattered. And the one time I tried to stay, tried to fight, I hesitated. And she slipped away like smoke. I rode into town the next day, hoping for any sign of her. The sheriff gave me a hard look but said nothing. The general store woman just said, she was real sweet. Real sad. No one knew where she had gone. No one had seen the bounty hunter either. That night, I returned to the cabin and sat on the porch with Ruth in my lap, watching the sky turn purple and then black. "Your mama was the bravest soul I ever knew," I whispered. Ruth curled into my coat, her breath warm against my chest. I was supposed to protect her. Just like I was supposed to protect June. I said their names like a prayer, but heaven stayed silent. For days, I searched. Checked trail posts, stage lines, farms up north. Nothing. Not a letter. Not a sound. I began to unravel. I stopped shaving. Stopped talking. Some nights I stared into the fire until the wood turned to ash and I had no tears left to shed. I even went back to that saloon. The one like the one from my childhood. Dim light, sour whiskey, and dead eyes. I sat at the bar and nursed a drink I did not want. Watched men gamble with money and women like they were dust. A man sat beside me. Asked if I was selling the baby. I broke his nose with one punch. That got me thrown out, but I did not care. Because I was not going to be my father. Not now. Not ever. I returned to the cabin and stared at the rocking chair, willing Clara to appear. She never did. But one morning, something changed. I was rocking Ruth, humming a tune Clara once sang, when a rider appeared on the hill. He was older. Thin. Wore a hat pulled low and rode a mule. He came slow, with a paper in his hand. I stepped outside, shotgun resting at my hip. He raised his hand in peace. "Name's Pastor Whitlow," he said. "I run a mission east of Rollins. Got a letter come through, figured it might belong to you." I eyed him, unsure. He handed me the paper. Folded. Worn at the edges. I opened it and read the first line. "Dear Levi, if this finds you, know that I am alive." It was her. Clara. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were hers. She wrote that she had escaped in the night, left the bounty hunters' camp while they slept, and found shelter in a mission run by a kind woman who took her in. She had no money. No way to send for me. But she wrote letters anyway, every week. Hoping one would find me. I read the letter twice. Then a third time. And I wept. Not loud. Not broken. Just quiet tears that fell like rain after a long drought. Pastor Whitlow stood silent until I wiped my face. "She is at the mission?" I asked. He nodded. "Been helpin' the nuns teach orphan girls. Got a fire in her, that one." I stepped inside, packed a bag, bundled Ruth, and left the cabin behind. Because the time for running had ended. It was time to rise. And this time, I would not be late. The mission sat on a rise overlooking the Wyoming plains, whitewashed walls, a small bell tower, and a crooked cross that leaned slightly in the wind. It looked too humble to hold miracles. But it held one. Clara. I arrived just before dusk. The sun was laying itself down across the hills, painting everything in soft gold. I rode slow, not from weariness but fear. What if she had changed her mind? What if she saw me and remembered all the ways I failed? I clutched Ruth tighter as I dismounted. She had fallen asleep in the saddle against my chest. A woman in a blue habit stepped out from the doorway. Her face was lined with kindness. "You must be Levi," she said. I nodded, unsure how to speak around the lump in my throat. "She is in the back garden. Been waiting every evening around this time." I walked slow, boots quiet against the gravel path, Ruth nestled in the crook of my arm. And then I saw her. Bent over a small row of wildflowers, hands in the dirt, hair tied back with twine. The fading sun lit her like something out of a memory I had not dared to hope for. She turned. Saw me. And froze. The basket in her hand dropped to the ground. I could not speak. My knees went weak. Then, like the end of a long drought, she ran. She crossed the garden with bare feet and wide eyes and tears already spilling. And she threw her arms around me like she never wanted to let go. I held her. Held Ruth. Held everything I thought I had lost. She sobbed into my chest, murmuring, "I thought you would hate me. I thought you would never come." I kissed her hair, breathing her in like a man who had been underwater too long. "I will always come," I whispered. We sat on the stone bench until the stars blinked out. She held Ruth like she had never let go. And I told her everything. About the days without her. About the ride. About the letter. And then, about June. I expected the pain. The shame. But Clara simply listened. And when I finished, she placed her hand over mine and said, "I think God gave Ruth a protector who once lost his sister so he would know exactly what to do with her love." I broke then. Not in sorrow, but in peace. Because for the first time in my life, someone saw all of me, and did not flinch. The next morning, we sat with the nuns over biscuits and jam. Clara told them I was staying. And they smiled like they already knew. I began to help with the chores. Repairing the fence. Fixing the well. Reading to the children, though I still stumbled over the words. Clara laughed when I mispronounced chrysanthemums. Ruth said "dada" for the first time that week. I froze. Clara smiled. "You do not have to say anything," she whispered. But I did. I said, "That name means more to me than anything I have ever been called." Because I was not just a wanderer now. Not just a ghost of grief. I was something else. A man who had found what he was never supposed to have: love, family, home. And it all began with a girl named June. A girl I still had not found. But something told me, she was closer than I thought. Clara said I was different now. Not in the way a man grows older, but in the way a man grows up. There was something steady inside me. Something rooted. The work at the mission gave me purpose. Fixing things. Carrying things. Holding babies while their mothers prayed. Reading aloud even when my tongue stumbled. I laughed more. I prayed more. I stopped flinching when someone touched my shoulder. But I still thought of June. Always. One Sunday afternoon, while Ruth napped and Clara picked herbs with the nuns, I wandered into the mission's library. The room was small, just 2 shelves, a desk, and a handful of worn chairs, but it smelled of paper and peace. On the far shelf sat a leather-bound journal, tucked behind a hymnal. I pulled it free, curious. Inside the cover was written, "Property of June McGraw, if found, please return." I dropped the book. My hands trembled. It was her. Her handwriting, looped and childlike, filled the first pages. She had written about being taken to a church home after the man who bought her gave her away to a kind older couple. She spoke of a mean beginning but a soft middle. She had stayed in 4 homes, always writing, always remembering. And then, near the back, she wrote this. "My oldest brother was named Levi. He was 10. He tried to save me. I do not blame him. He was my protector, and I know he loved me. I still have the ribbon he gave me, blue as the sky. Someday, I will find him again." I sat in that library for a long time. Not crying. Just holding the weight of it all. She remembered. And she had been here. I ran outside, breath sharp, heart racing. Clara turned at the sound of my boots on gravel. "What is it?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. I held up the journal. "June," I said. She was here. Clara gasped, hand over her mouth. She wrote in this. She remembered everything. She still had the ribbon. Clara's eyes welled with tears. "Do you think she's still nearby?" "I do not know," I whispered. "But I have to try." And Clara, without hesitation, said, then we will find her. That night, after we laid Ruth down, Clara and I sat by candlelight and made a list of every mission, school, and church between Rawlins and the territory lines. Over the next few weeks, I rode to each one. Sometimes Clara came. Sometimes she stayed and I brought back news. Most said they had no record. Some remembered a girl with blonde curls and a quiet laugh. One woman, a schoolteacher in Medicine Bow, remembered a girl who used to braid blue ribbons into her hair and told stories to the orphans. She said her brother had hands like stone and a heart like fire, the woman said. She said he would come. I rode harder after that. With each trail, each name, I felt the distance closing. Not just between me and June, but between who I had been and who I was becoming. Because now I had Clara beside me. Ruth in my arms. And a purpose that burned brighter than grief. I was not just surviving anymore. I was seeking. And in that seeking, I found something else. Strength. Not the kind that lifts fence posts or breaks wild horses. But the kind that forgives the past. The kind that believes in redemption. One morning, I stood outside the mission as the sun rose over the prairie, light touching the wildflowers Clara planted. I closed my eyes and prayed. Not for forgiveness. But for reunion. Because I had already been forgiven. By Clara. By Ruth. And maybe, just maybe, by June. The letter came by rail. It arrived in a burlap sack with half a dozen others, delivered by a boy who rode in on a mule, dust in his hair and wonder in his eyes. He handed it to me like it was no different than a seed order or a church notice. But the name on the front stopped my breath cold. To Levi McGraw. Care of the Rawlins Mission. From June. I opened it with shaking hands beneath the old elm tree where Clara and I sometimes sat to watch Ruth chase chickens. Her handwriting had grown. Neater, more sure. Dear Levi. If this finds you, know that I never stopped looking. I am alive, well, and running a home for abandoned girls in Laramie. I read to them, teach them to write, and every Sunday I tell them a story about a boy who saved his sister by remembering her name. That boy was you. My eyes burned. I do not know what life gave you. I only hope it gave you love. I hope you found peace somewhere along the trail. And if this reaches you, know that I still have the ribbon. And I am waiting. With love always. June. I folded the letter like a holy thing. Then I ran. Clara was inside, shelling peas beside the fire, Ruth on her hip. She looked up and saw my face, and her whole body stilled. She is alive, I said. Clara stood slowly. Where? Laramie. She runs a girl's home. She remembers everything. She's proud of me. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling. You have to go, she whispered. I want you with me. We packed that afternoon. Ruth squealed at the sight of the saddlebag, thinking it was a game. And maybe it was, a game the Lord had planned from the beginning. A slow redemption, a weaving of sorrow into something whole. We rode 2 days, Clara and I taking turns with Ruth. We spoke little, but our silence was full. Of hope. Of fear. Of joy we dared not name. Laramie came into view at sunset. The girl's home was made of stone and painted blue around the windows. There was laughter inside. Someone was singing. I dismounted and walked to the front door, Ruth pressed tight to my chest. I knocked. Footsteps. Then a voice I had not heard in 17 years. Coming. The door creaked open. She stood before me, older, taller, her hair streaked with gray at the temples, but those eyes. They were June's. For a moment, she simply stared. Then her hand flew to her mouth. Levi? I nodded, too choked to speak. She stepped forward, trembling. And I reached into my coat and pulled out the ribbon. Her fingers touched it like it was made of gold. Then she threw her arms around me and sobbed. Clara wept behind me, holding Ruth. June pulled back just enough to look at the baby. "Who is she?" "Ruth," I said. "Clara's daughter. Ours, now." June smiled through tears. "She looks like Mama used to. Before." I nodded. We stood there a long time, arms wrapped around something bigger than memory. It was healing. It was homecoming. And it was ours. Have you ever reconnected with someone you thought you lost forever? How did it change you? We stayed in Laramie longer than we planned. At first, it was just a week. Then a month. June needed us, and truth be told, we needed her too. Clara and June became fast friends. They cooked together, braided the girls' hair, and read poetry out loud on the front steps. Ruth followed June like a shadow, tugging her skirts and babbling nonsense, as if she had always belonged there. And maybe she had. But peace in the West is always hard-won, and never guaranteed. It came one cool morning when the town's deputy rode up the lane, dust on his collar and a frown on his face. He tipped his hat at Clara. "Ma'am." Then looked to me. "Levi McGraw?" "Yes, sir. I have a summons here. Issued in Cheyenne. Clara May Dalton, also named as Clara May Blackwood, is being charged with unlawful desertion and theft of property belonging to the Dalton estate." Clara stiffened. June stepped forward. "She's done nothing wrong." The deputy lowered his eyes. "I do not disagree. But the law's the law. She needs to appear in front of Judge Kelly by the end of the week. You can come peaceably, or not." I looked at Clara. She was pale, but calm. "I will go," she said softly. "No more running." After the deputy rode off, I turned to her. "You do not have to face this alone." Clara's eyes met mine. "I do not intend to." We packed up Ruth and left the next morning for Cheyenne, with June staying behind to mind the home. The courtroom was small, too warm, and filled with faces that looked at Clara like she was a criminal. But when the judge read the charges, unlawful desertion, theft, abandonment of marital estate, Clara stood straight and answered clear. "I left to save my daughter's life. I took what was mine. And I do not regret it." The prosecutor laughed. "Do you have proof the man was abusive?" Clara held up her hand. The thin scar across her wrist told the story. "Do you have proof you owned the money?" "I have something better," she said. Then she looked at me. I stepped forward with a small leather pouch and laid it on the table. Inside were letters. Letters Thomas Dalton had written before his death, letters Clara had kept in fear. "I found these under a floorboard in the cabin," I said. His handwriting. His signature. Threats. Warnings. Proof. The judge read them slowly. Frowned. "Read again." When he finally looked up, the room was silent. "This case," he said, "should never have reached my bench." He banged his gavel. All charges dropped. Clara sank into the bench beside me, trembling. I wrapped my arms around her. And for the first time since I met her, she truly exhaled. Outside, the wind blew soft and the sky stretched blue as June's ribbon. Clara turned to me. "I thought I would break today," she whispered. "You did not." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Because you stood with me." I kissed her hair. "I always will." We rode home in silence, but the silence was sweet. June met us at the gate, Ruth squealing in her arms. "Welcome home," she said. And those two words felt like the final nail in the coffin of all that came before. We were no longer lost souls looking for shelter. We were a family, chosen, tested, forgiven. And from that day forward, nothing could steal that from us again. Life quieted, the way the land settles after a storm. We built a house near the edge of the girls' home. Just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was ours. Clara planted rosemary by the door. June brought over pies and laughter every Sunday. Ruth learned to walk between the rows of wildflowers we had sown. I built furniture with my hands, things meant to last, a cradle, a bookshelf, a rocking chair for Clara. She painted the walls soft green and lined the windows with lace curtains. Every piece of that home had a story behind it, a scar, a memory, a promise. And I found myself, slowly, learning how to breathe without guilt. I still carried June's ribbon. But now it hung on a nail above the door, framed in a wooden box I carved myself. A reminder, not of what was lost, but of what had been found again. June continued her work with the girls, stronger than ever. The children adored her, especially Ruth, who called her Auntie and followed her into every room like a song that would not end. Some nights, I would find the 2 of them asleep by the fire, storybook open, arms tangled like roots. Clara became the heart of our home. She cooked for everyone, strays, orphans, ranch hands passing through. She laughed often now. Not loud or reckless, but that quiet laugh that comes from a heart no longer afraid. As for me, I changed too. I stopped fearing my past. Stopped hiding from my name. I spoke of June now. Of Eli and Sarah. Of Mama and Papa, not to shame them, but to remember that even broken beginnings can lead to something beautiful. I shared my story with the children. How a boy can be sold but still grow into a man. How love does not erase scars, but it makes them easier to bear. How sometimes, family is not what you are born into, but what you build with open hands. And when folks asked how I became who I was, I told them this. I once watched everything good be taken from me. One by one. But I held on to one thing, the name of a girl with a blue ribbon. That name saved me. That love brought me back. One evening, Clara and I sat beneath the stars, Ruth asleep on her lap. She looked at me and said, "Do you ever wonder why all of this had to happen first, the pain, the loss?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "Because I think if none of that happened, I would not have been ready for you. For her. For this." She leaned her head on my shoulder. We watched the sky stretch wide and open above us, and I felt something I never thought I would feel. Peace. Not the kind that forgets what came before, but the kind that holds it gently, without letting it rule. I had walked through fire. But I was not ash. I was something new. Something whole. Some stories begin with love. Ours began with loss. But if you have heard anything in my voice, let it be this. What is taken can be redeemed. What is broken can be rebuilt. And sometimes, family is not blood, but choice. My name is Levi McGraw. I was sold for a jug of whiskey. I was abandoned, forgotten, cast out like a stray. But I was also found. By a woman who had every reason to fear and chose to trust instead. By a sister who waited 17 years with nothing but a ribbon and hope. By a child who called me Dada before I believed I deserved it. The West is harsh. It will test a man's soul, take his name, bend his back. But if you hold on, if you love harder than the world hates, you will come through. You will rise. I carry scars, yes. But I also carry the smell of rosemary by our door, the sound of Ruth's giggle in spring, and the soft touch of Clara's hand in mine each night. I carry the strength of June's waiting. And the truth that love, when chosen daily, can heal anything. So if you are out there feeling like life passed you by, if you are bruised by betrayal, if you think it is too late for a new beginning, remember my name. Remember hers. And remember that no matter how deep the hurt, there is always a way home. You just have to believe it is still out there waiting. He was sold for whiskey, but found his worth in love. Now tell me, what part of Levi and Clara's story stayed with you most? Was it the loss, the fight, or the healing? I would truly love to know. Leave a comment below and share your heart.